Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing fine, and yes, this is the next part of What If Naruto repeat the Chunin exam. When Naruto finds he is flung back in time and must repeat the entire Chunin exam over and over and over, until he gets it right and possibly saves Konoha in the bargain. So let's start with the story without any delay. If anything, Shitsune had understated the demand for this new technique. No sooner had Ino invented it, and the others began using it, than the women of the village began talking about it to an extent not even the gossip centers of Konoha saw very often, and so of course the nobles heard of it, and even though none of the Fire Lord's family were pregnant just then, he had the entire clan withdrawn from active ninja service for fear of harm or accident. Sooner even than when he'd been letting people discover he was this amazing tailor, Naruto got pulled out of the Chunin exams, he and all of his genin girls, and the Fire Lord was looking to marry him off to one of the lesser and more disposable minor noble ladies of his court to more firmly cement his hold on the young lad with the amazing medical clan when the reset rescued them. Well, I was going to send all of you losers out to fight each other in no-holds-barred struggles, ambushing and killing each other in the forest of death, Anko declared to the room of genin. But that just sounded too easy. She smirked at the seriousness of most of the faces of the class. Okay, she had to admit, you do the same thing over and over and it just gets boring. So, since she was in charge of the second installment, and had authority to change it more or less on her whim, she did so. So, instead, we're going to play a little game. It's called Torture and Interrogation. We'll have the Chunin proctors select one member from each team, always a girl if you've got one, as those make for the easiest marks for interrogation in most cases. Anko noted the nervous looks of most of her prospective students, so she knew she was doing a good job as she continued. She will be disarmed and bound as a pretend prisoner of war, and given a secret she has to keep if her team is to pass this exam. Then the remaining 2 members of her team will receive the kunoichi of some other team, while she gets dragged off to be handed to someone else in turn. The job of the 2 guys will be to get the secret information out of the kunoichi they receive. But since this is only a test, they'll not be permitted to do any permanent damage. We'll pretend that is because of delicate political situations, which happens more often than you'd think in real life. Anko tossed her hair, secretly pleased by the frightened looks she saw. It occurs often enough when you know a mark has a secret you need, but they are a member of an allied, or at least not enemy, village, and so you can't just turn them into hamburger without risking a war. That also means no rape, sexual assault, or other crimes with serious consequences. A light touch only interrogation, or one of the most difficult to do. Any team that crosses that line automatically fails. Any kunoichi that gives up her secret also fails on behalf of both her and her team. Any pair of guys that fail to get a secret out of their target prisoner fails the exam as well. To pass, a team has to succeed at both, getting the secret out of the prisoner they are given, while the captured member has to not divulge hers. You'll have 30 minutes in which to work, and the girls are permitted to attempt to escape if they can. A bunch of very serious genin looked at each other as one of the proctors called out for them to line up to receive room assignments. The number of medics arriving in the building was not lost on anyone. On Hinata's team, Shino turned to his teammates and said, very quietly, no average member of most villages can withstand the sensation of a carpet of bugs crawling all over their body for long, and so long as they do not bite, no harm is done. We shall not have difficulties on our interrogation. Hinata, can you withstand yours? The Hyuga girl gave both of the boys on her team a confident, even bright, nod. Yes. You don't know what they'll pull, Kiba cautioned, concerned on her behalf. In some ways it hardly matters, she whispered back, flexing her fingers just a touch so they could see small blades of blue chakra energy form briefly at their tips. Kuinai has been holding a small study club at her house for lots of Konoha's genin kunoichi. One of the things we've been studying is medicine. Whoever gets me will be expecting a bound, unarmed prisoner. But I don't need weapons, and with chakra scalpels to cut the ropes I won't be much of a prisoner, either. I'll be a full-on combatant, already at close quarters where I am at my most dangerous. And they don't dare do much damage in return trying to subdue me, for fear of failing the exam. If any kunoichi stands a chance on this test, I do. Kiba looked relieved, and Shino merely nodded, satisfied. Both boys had also already begun silently planning contingencies in their minds for if the same occurred to them, receiving a prisoner who wasn't much of a prisoner, and how to gently subdue someone who was able to fight back. Over across the room, Ino turned on her own teammates in one of those short, impromptu, very urgent and very quiet conferences that were forming all over the exam chamber. She gave Shikamaru a hard glare. Okay, guys, tell me straight up, are you even going to try to pass this exam at all? I don't want to be desperately holding out, subjected to who knows what, only to find out after that fact that it was all a pointless effort. Shikamaru and Choji shared a guilty glance, knowing that, given their choice, they'd have done next to nothing to pass this exam. Sitting down, eating potato chips, and chatting peacefully with whatever kunoichi the proctors delivered had been high on their agenda. But the boys also knew that their fathers would never stand for them not even caring enough to enter the contest. Shikamaru in particular had been given very stern and sharp warnings by his mother about failing through non-effort. If they'd been in the test, and failed, not getting the secret, that was one thing. But to not even attempt to take it by bowing out before it started was going to buy him hell at home. Although, both boys could also see the justice in what Ino was asking. They had no idea what she'd be subjected to, but whatever it was not going to be pleasant. So it would be rude in the extreme to waste whatever effort she put into maintaining the secret she was given. They also had to admit that they didn't want her end of the bargain. Shikamaru opened his mouth to suggest something when Ino beat him to it. Because I could just blurt out the secret the moment I walk through the door of whatever room I get sent to, if you want, Ino told both boys in a very direct manner. Then she smirked, upholding a finger to instruct them in consequences. I just want you to know that I'll be telling both of your families that I did so, and why, that's all. Shikamaru blanched. Not working, he had some amount of leeway for, usually. Working was one of those things he had to do occasionally. Pretending to work happened more often. Getting caught pretending to work, however, was the worst of all possible outcomes for him. His mom would be a nightmare about it for months. Until he made Chunin, at least. That was the only thing he could think of that would appease her after being revealed in a major slack-off of that level. No, we'll get the secret. We promise, Choji answered for him around the potato chips in his mouth. In another part of that chamber, Tenten turned to her teammates. So, guys, she asked brightly, have you got any plans? You hold out, we'll get our answer, Neji told her coldly and formally. That isn't much of a strategy, Tenten scowled at them. It will be successful. That is enough. The boy told her just as formally. Yosh. Our fires of youth burn so brightly. We cannot help but succeed. Lee shouted aloud across the entire chamber. Once the eyes of the other teams had turned away from them, back to their private conferences again, Tenten leaned closer to whisper. Lee, you can't just make the girl do push-ups for the half hour or so it will take. Have either of you got any coherent strategy for how to do this? You hold out. We'll do our part, Neji told her again, just as coldly. The girl rolled her eyes and huffed, turning away and folding her arms. Other conversations were going even less brightly. Sakura had turned to her teammates, showing her fear and lack of confidence over the upcoming test. She had supreme confidence in Sasuke, but this test focused directly on her abilities as a ninja, and she couldn't hide behind him on this. Just as she was sure of Sasuke's success, so much was she certain of her own failure on this particular matter. And that left her in the unenviable position of having personally disappointed her crush by her failure to perform her part of this test, which just happened to matter very much to him. Such a thing could easily cause him to reject or even hate her. She knew it, and she feared that more than she did not trying at all. But she also knew she wasn't strong, and looking at the fierce ninja about that room, the girl knew inside that they would break her. She wasn't strong. She would fail. And, as she faced her team, Sasuke saw that certain knowledge in her eyes and turned away from her in disgust. Naruto, for all of the distance that had grown between his and his team over those resets, simply could not let that stand and interjected, "Hey, Sakura. What's it worth to you to pass? If we use disguises, I could switch places with you. I can take anything." The pink-haired girl bounced in joy, clasping her hands and crying aloud, "Naruto! Would you do that for me?" she asked in bright hope. "No," he returned, just as serious as she was bright, causing her hopes to crash down in confusion. "Not for you, nor for the team or the rank, either. But maybe you could offer something to convince me." She stared in frank disbelief at his foxy grin. For Naruto's part, he didn't want anything. He was just playing with them, like Anko was doing with this test. It was to stir things up, keep them interesting and prevent events from getting entirely too boring. They had no strict aims either for this test, or the reset. It was, to them, a sort of vacation where they weren't trying to achieve anything, drive for any kind of goal, or even further their training. It was just an opportunity to see how things could go if something big was different. They'd found their need to take mental vacation days like this less than the need had been for Naruto when he was alone, but they still had to have some. Sakura, for her part, was dazed by confusion. She'd just tried to make a charge on her Naruto Loves Me credit card, only to find it had been cancelled. But she had none of the time required to find out when or why he'd stopped loving her. Sasuke was already waiting, saying nothing, yet paying attention to this conversation between the two of them anyway. Sasuke already knew she felt she was doomed to failure, and if she did fail him he may never forgive her. It would seriously ruin her chances. So, ultimately, her relationship with Sasuke was at stake. Also, there was the undeniable fact that Naruto was the most stubborn person she knew. He'd withstood most anything thrown at him yet. So, if he took her place, there was very little chance of failure. The girl snorted, while inner Sakura was cheering aloud that if 6 years of telling him she wasn't interested didn't stop him from asking her out, then half an hour of a non-damaging interrogation test had no chance to break Naruto's nerves. "I'll bet you ramen." She played her trump card right away, hoping only that Sasuke wouldn't think this was any kind of date offering to the blonde. "Nope. Not interested." Naruto folded his hands behind his head casually as he kicked back on his heels and stared up at the ceiling. "I'm friends with the owner's daughter. All of my ramen is now free." Sakura had to use a spatula to pry her jaw up off the floor. Her trump card hadn't been as much of a trump as she'd thought it was. Screwing her face back into shape, the kunoichi tried harder. "I'll ask Kakashi to teach you a jutsu," she tempted sweetly. Naruto turned a disbelieving eyeball on her. "Why would he teach me one if you asked when he hasn't taught you one yet?" Stumped, the kunoichi had no answer to that and turned desperate. "How about I allow you to take me out on one date, only one? No use asking me for more." All her blonde teammate did was shrug nonchalantly. "I don't want any. Hinata and I have started going out, and she's a very good girlfriend to me. I don't have any use for your half-hearted leavings when there's a girl who's already interested in me." For a second time, the pink-haired girl had to use a spatula to pry her jaw up off the floor. But this time she also had to reel her eyeballs back into their sockets after she'd done that. "You know, you're not being very convincing," Naruto told her in bored tones. Realizing that her time for doing any sort of trade was running out, that the test proctors had already begun walking around the room separating out the kunoichi, Sakura fell back on the bulwark of the desperate. "Anything," she cried out in a fierce whisper, clasping her hands before her. "I'll do anything. You just name it." Instead of answering her, Naruto turned a bored glance to their other teammate, who was getting more than a bit annoyed that proceedings had dragged on so long that now their chances for carrying this off were being diminished. "Sasuke, you just heard her offer. But I don't trust her not to back out of whatever I ask afterward. So, I want your word as an Uchiha that if she backs out of our bargain you'll never permit her to seek your romantic attentions again." Sakura's face drained white in shock that Naruto would go that far as to ask that level of surety. Although, Ina Sakura had to admit, she hadn't really meant her promise, and if he'd asked anything more than something mildly inconvenient she'd have put no effort at all into it before turning him down. Sasuke drilled their pink-haired teammate with a steady glare, before answering Naruto, "You have my word." That response stunned the kunoichi into thoughtless immobility. The next thing Sakura knew, she was standing where Naruto had been, while someone who looked exactly like her was being escorted off by a pair of Chunin. The doppelganger looked back toward her and shot a victory sign. Looking down proved she was wearing an orange jumpsuit, while a touch to her face told her that it wasn't her features she was wearing. She was not as good a ninja as she thought, or she would have realized that this was no ordinary transformation illusion. But whatever it was, it had fooled the test proctors and gotten her out of her certain failure, so she was grateful. However, that anything goes promise hanging over her head did much to diminish her joy over her recent deliverance. "Fail and you die." Gaara glared at his sister as she was about to be led away. To his surprise, she laughed brightly in reply, almost causing Kankuro an aneurysm that she would risk their psycho little brother's eye like that. She even reached over and pinched Gaara's cheek. "Now you behave," she told him. "And when I come back we'll all go out for ice cream and to play with some balloons." Convinced that their sister had totally taken leave of her senses and lost that healthy, self-respecting terror in which all thinking beings held their murderous little brother, and that said psycho was going to lash out any moment to destroy her, Kankuro began scanning the chamber for a good place to hide while his puppet got killed in his stead as part of inevitable collateral damage. He'd barely been at this a second when he felt a tug on his sleeve, and looked down, nearly wetting himself at the sight of Gaara there touching his arm. "Come," the murderous little psychopath told him. "We have our room assignment. You aren't going to kill me." Kankuro's traitorous tongue blurted out before his brain had a chance to properly censor that comment. No murderous rampage destroying this chamber and hundreds of people. No, Gaara returned sourly. I've done things like that before. It is nothing new to me. What I have not done is played with these balloons. Tell me, do they squeal as they die? Kankuro blinked several times, waiting for reality. Already his traitorous mouth was mumbling, only if you let the air out real slow. Dash. Oh, dear, oh, dear. What is going to happen to me? The little blonde girl led in by the two Chunin kept on mumbling, her twin pigtails hanging low to cover her downturned face. He. Splut. The two rain genin who'd been slapping tools of various menacing natures into their hands fell over as the fists Naruto had shoved in their faces connected solidly. They didn't get up again. Well, that was anticlimactic. Naruto in female guise said solidly as she raised her head back up, dropping the whole helpless damsel act. Come along, Kunai told her. Next room. Oh, why do I have to do so many? Naruto groused, already tired of this. Well, you wouldn't want any of the real girls go to any of the really dangerous boys, do you? No, I wouldn't, Naruto sighed, resigning herself to this as she allowed herself to be manacled again. Seeing the other Jonin stare at her, Kunai laughed. Oh. Don't worry. Anko only promised them a girl from another team. Not that she wouldn't be a boy in disguise, or more dangerous than most Chunin, or even that they wouldn't be the 10th or 11th room she got sent to. Dash. Now Beggar voice said softly. Please. You've got to let me go. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. Will you tell me the secret? I don't know any. The terrified boy pled up to Hinata, where she was standing over him. His teammate had already passed out beside him. They only told the girls. Well, in that case it's all right, the kind girl allowed, patting her would-be captor on the head before turning about and leaving the room where she'd been taken. Dash. Oh dear. When they disarmed me they seemed to have forgotten the tigers I had up my sleeves, Tamrai told the two terrified youngsters from sound as they stared up into the jaws of the mighty beasts that literally had the boys' heads between their teeth. All the tigers had to do was clamp down and those boys would be history. The paws on their chests holding them down didn't hurt any, either. Yet. Sitting down to file her nails, the girl from Sand didn't even look up to see the two boys paralyzed by fright, afraid to move lest they anger the tigers. Now, what shall we talk about? Dash. Talk. Sajuk ordered sternly. Oh, please. You've got to do better than that. His bored prisoner stated. The Kunoichi only wished she could be filing her nails. This was boring. Dash. The girl's muffled screams were actually kind of disturbing. Choji rose up just barely enough to let the girl gasp in a shallow breath before he sat back down again. Something about this is so wrong, Shikamaru lazily shook his head. The girl made the hand signal they'd previously agreed upon for her surrender and Choji got up, no longer sitting on the bound girl's face. As she drew in her first gasps in over a minute, not drawn from between Choji's boxer-clad butt cheeks, Shikamaru reminded her in a bored tone, remember, if you don't give up the code after having signaled surrender then he sits back down, and doesn't get up again until you pass out. I'll tell. The poor foreign Kunoichi desperately reassured them. And then she proceeded to puke her guts out. Shikamaru sighed. So troublesome. Sorry, Choji shrugged. I didn't mean to fart so much. The poor kid was actually kind of embarrassed. Dash. Hi. Well. You know, that's actually kind of creepy. The foreign girl who had Shino's bugs crawling all over her stated in a calm tone. Where do you think up things like this? Shino leaned in close, took off his glasses for the first time in like, ever, and staring her straight in the eyes so she could see the bugs crawling around inside of his pupils, whispered, "This is what I live for." She screamed. Kiba covered his ears. Shino did not permit himself to smile over her reaction to the minor illusion. Thinking you were freaky nuts who didn't care was the first part of breaking your prisoner. Ibaki would have approved. Talk. Sajuk ordered sternly, again. Do you guys have, like, a magazine I could read or something? Tenten was still out in the halls, where a trio of Chunin were still going through her pockets and pulling out weapons, while a fourth wrote down her list on a clipboard, so it could be returned to her. Another kunai. 24 flashed canisters with explosive tags, not currently armed. Claymore. Sickle and chain combo. Just plain sickle. A tired and very put upon Sai. Another kunai. Spear. As he looked up at her from the deep pile all around her, Tenten shot the man passing by a slightly apologetic smile. He simply turned the page and went on writing. Blowgun. A deep groan sounded, and one of the trio announced, another kunai. Talk. Neji ordered in stern tones. The kunoichi he was addressing blew a bubble in her gum and popped it, before going back to chewing without saying a word. Groan. Another sickle. Moan. Another chain. One of the Chunin almost broke down crying. Another kunai. Talk. Sakura tried ordering sternly. Do you guys mind? Try to keep it down a little bit, you're disturbing my nap. Their prisoner retorted. The thing you've got to see here, Kankuro explained to the unfortunate Konoha kunoichi who had been delivered to them, and now resided rather stoically, ignorant of her true danger, in Gaara's sand coffin technique, is that this man is insane. He motioned to his brother, who did not object. You see, the thing is, he's already killed hundreds of people, including our uncle. Our whole town is terrified of him. Kankuro sweated as he divulged this information, hoping against hope that it would not get him killed out of hand. It won't matter to him a bit that we'll fail the test, he just likes killing. And while we can take this test again, you won't be able to appreciate the fact that the rest of your team passed without you. He gave her a nervous, helpless sort of shrug. Finally disturbed enough to look at Gaara's eyes, and terrified by what she saw there, the kunoichi began to blab at once. Another spear, the Chunin sobbed, as if he'd been stabbed with it. Another kunai, one of the others blubbered out in between his sobs. The third found something, and perked up. Fishing pole, fly and lure, and high test line. The two others perked up as well. One of them asking, "Hey, is that really a graphite pole? Can I see that? There's gotta be a pond around here somewhere," the last agreed. What about? The bloodless accounted type with the clipboard began asking, pointing with his pen at Tenten, still standing there blushing. Forget it. The lead of the trio called, already departing. If she can carry that many weapons, she's welcome to it. Yeah, the team about to question her is almost out of time already. The last called back over his shoulder. Tenten just blushed and shrugged at the accountant's curious look. Anko smirked. Most of the girls were Naruto's shadow clones under shape changes. If they got dispelled, that team lost. So slight damage was still too much. Most teams that got rough, therefore, got expelled immediately. It was a day that creativity got rewarded. It was a great day to be a Konoha Jonin. Talk. Sajuk ordered. You know, I think she's actually snoring, Sakura offered timidly. Tell. Bway ha ha ha. No. Never. Ha 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 ha. He. Lee did not let up on his relentless tickle assault. Yes. He shouted out in glee as his amazing hands found ticklish spots the girl didn't know she had. The flames of youth burn brightly in this one. Off standing in the corner, Neji hung his head in his hands. Ha 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 ha, the helpless girl yelled, squirming awfully against her bonds where she was tied to her chair. Speak. Or I will make you pee. And I will record this event to show it to all of your friends in our village. Lee shouted out from behind his camcorder, one hand still reaching out to tickle her devilishly. Enough. Enough. Uncle. The girl cried out. I'll talk. Just let me breathe. Lee, filled with a juvenile trust in Kunoichi, allowed her to get her breath back. Still red-faced and smiling, on having recovered, the girl told him. Nope. Sorry, I changed my mind. Instantly his fingers lunged out. She was crying for mercy in seconds, unable to breathe not long after, and in danger of wetting herself quite prodigiously, on film no less. She hadn't forgotten that, soon after. I'll tell. I'll tell. The poor girl shouted. 2 gasps. Lee, now much wiser, shouted. If you do not speak by then you lose your chance and I will continue to tickle until you embarrass yourself before your friends forever. Which will it be, a Chunin who has to hide her face from everyone she knows or a genin who can try for the rank again? A shame which can never end or a 6-month wait. Now is your chance to decide. I'll talk. She pled. And then the girl proceeded to spill her guts about the secret. Neji Hyuga vs Hinata Hyuga. The head examiner for the 3rd test called. You should just give up. Neji told his cousin after the pair of them had walked out onto the floor for the preliminaries. You know you cannot defeat me. Quit now and you will avoid sustaining an injury, or possible death. Hinata looked like she might falter, until Naruto called out encouragement from the stands. Then the frail young heiress settled into a stance firmly, a look of determination on her face. The little girl, for once in her life, seemed determined to do or die. Surprised, but somewhat gratified he would be able to take out his anger on a member of the main house at last, Neji also assumed a fighting pose. They activated their bloodlines at the same time. What the, was Neji's immediate thought as his all-around X-ray vision slapped into place, alerting him to his surroundings in fine detail. Although he stood across from Hinata, his cousin, the daughter of his father's elder brother whom he had known and not so privately despised all of his life, once his bloodline activated it revealed that another Hinata was up on the balcony, under a disguise to look like Naruto. Also, she had one Sharingan, and it was activated. In an instant, he realized that she was not the only one. 2 other Kunoichi from their village had active Sharingan, but to disguise that fact were under transformation techniques to look like themselves. But which was the real Hinata? There couldn't be 2 of her. He had no more time to ponder this further as the one opposite him on the challenge floor swept in on her attack, and whatever doubts he had about her performance got swept away. This was Hinata. The attack routine was all hers, and he knew it intimately, having sparred with her countless times, always to her defeat. She showed forth unusual spirit, but she obviously felt that it was Naruto who had cheered for her, spurring her on, rather than a disguised, whatever. Neji didn't care why she cared for that boy. In his heart he put it down to two losers taking comfort in their equals and left it at that. But he could not let this question slide. Who was the other Hinata? The one watching with a stolen Sharingan and disguised to look like Naruto. As he blocked Hinata's strikes, closing off her chakra points in his own blindingly fast blows, the boy saw the Uchiha passed out in a stall in the men's room. His eye sockets were empty, and in the next stall over was the Jonin Kakashi, also in the same state, passed out and deprived of Sharingan. So this was clearly enemy action. But who had done it? And why were they watching his fight with Hinata rather than making their getaway? The gentle fist style was worthless to all but a Hyuga, as it required their own unique bloodline to function. And why be disguised as Naruto? Or why look like Hinata underneath? The Hyuga bloodline saw through all illusions, so what could that be? Neji allowed Hinata to strike him, taking the blow on his chest where she thought she could stop his heart, only to trap her hand with his and roll up her sleeve, showing to all that he had successfully blocked off all of her chakra points, rendering her helpless before he'd taken her inconsequential hit. His victory and superiority were clear and unmistakable in that moment. Then, instead of falling prone in the weakness she ought to be feeling, Hinata grinned at him, smirking, stood there and flexed, red chakra emitting from all of her formerly closed points, forcing them violently open again, before she formed a hand seal and resumed the assault. Luckily for Neji, he had kept his bloodline activated, otherwise he would have missed the formation of a dozen shadow clones all around him. As it was, Hinata and her clones closed in and began to attack from all directions simultaneously, acting in carefully choreographed concert, always pressing in and never letting up from any angle. Neji found himself resorting to his clan's secret defensive technique, the heavenly spin, more than once to fend off the deadly coordinated onslaught. But the clones had the weakness of all shadow clones, in that they could only sustain a single hit before dispersing. Not able to respond to his speed when he was fighting full force, the clone army dispersed and Hinata, the real or fake he didn't know, lay at his feet panting and trying to restart her own stopped heart. She succeeded, somewhat to his surprise, but not before the head examiner proclaimed him the winner and medics began carting her off. On suspicion, Neji kept his bloodline activated for a few moments more, long enough to see the Hinata he had fought release some sort of solid, non-illusion transformation to become Naruto, and bounce up off the stretcher they had carried her out on. The two medics also released the same sort of techniques to become copies of Anko, the special Jonin who had led the previous exam. Hokage-sama, the boy began, then the village leader turned to face him and interrupted. What you have seen, Neji Hyuga, is an S-rank mission approved by myself, and you are to keep it secret. Understand? Yes, Hokage-sama. The boy respectfully bowed his head and walked away, determined to keep the secret. Under Naruto's solid transformation, Tsunade permitted herself to smirk. The real Hokage was passed out in a pool of blood in his office, after having enjoyed one too many, which was only one, really. At his age the stress on his heart was dangerous, of Naruto's sexy paradise illusions. The nosebleed had been tremendous. The old pervert had truly enjoyed being knocked out in that fashion, and that left them free to shapeshift a replacement for him during the exams. It had to be Tsunade, as so far she was the only one sufficiently subtle in using that electrical technique to manipulate the scoreboard. Really, they'd had to do it. There wasn't another good way to arrange to let the girls use stolen Sharingans to copy out the Hyuga gentle fist style. Neji was better than any of them at it, so it made sense to use him as their copy dummy. And Naruto, bless his heart, had copied Hinata's style long ago, so could make for an almost perfect replacement for her. Naruto fought Neji using Hinata's form so Hinata herself could observe to learn Neji's moves. And, while they were doing that for Hinata, it made sense to let the other up-and-coming gentle fist students learn as well. Although, those in the witness gallery had to be under illusions so no one else there knew they had Sharingans and wondered where they'd gotten them. And all that led back to why she was here impersonating the Hokage, because it was obvious to them that Neji's bloodline would be activated during that fight, because it always was when someone used the gentle fist style, and they'd seen this scene before, of course, and they knew he'd see through those illusions because that's part of what the bloodline does, but it couldn't see through a shapeshift, so she could be on hand to shut down his suspicions before they caused them any problems. Of course, impersonating the Hokage had other benefits, such as sending forth people into all new, interesting confrontations. So she stood back and watched quietly as Shino fought that chakra-draining guy. You never really knew who was going to win in some of these combinations until you'd tried them, but with that information they could refine their invasion plans. And choose Konoha's future team leaders, naturally. Kuinai looked out across the green swath of grass to where Sakura was laboring in great panting breaths to squeeze one more kick out of her body at the post. Earlier the girl had been trudging like a condemned criminal in a chain gang past her on a long jog. The poor, pink spandex-wearing girl's forfeit had been to match Lee in his training regime for a week, and for every kick, every blow, every step she fell short by the newly drawn seal on her forehead caused her to lose a hair. The poor girl was already halfway bald, and it was only the first day of the week. Anko, who was in charge of the second test, had decreed that since Naruto had personally taken care of over a dozen Kunoichi positions without losing out on keeping the secret once, that he'd passed even though his team didn't. She had that kind of power, and so they hadn't reset yet. So out there Sakura was, paying for her rash decision to offer to do anything. But Kuinai's thoughts were not on Sakura's suffering. It was, more to the point, on her own. For she had already struggled through something the other girls in the clan were only discovering, namely, that personal relationships outside of those also caught in the resets didn't survive very well. Naruto had been through this a long time ago. Anko had no close relationships to lose, but Kuinai. She sighed. Asuma had always been an indifferent suitor to her. He'd just been the best she had, not like that was any kind of ringing compliment, either to him or to her. Not wanting to admit to their relationship had been another serious damper to her. A girl wanted to be acknowledged. The Jonin sighed, watching Sakura fall down, exhausted, and clutch at her ever-increasing forehead as more hairs fell out. What the girl didn't know was that the hair loss would only last a week, and Naruto had put her under a slight regeneration seal based on Kabuto's technique so that, even though it probably wasn't obvious to her, she was learning at an accelerated rate and the muscles she was acquiring in this would make her a far better ninja, at least until the reset took them all away again. Still, though she suffered now, it was doing her good. And Naruto was testing out that seal to use as a training device for the non-Kyuubi decorated, so it had potential to do a great amount of good. It was a decent metaphor for most of them, actually. Kuinai sighed again. She'd kept letting her thoughts get distracted from the real issue. And, she had to admit that she didn't want to face it. Her love life was, literally, going nowhere. Asuma had never been any kind of prize, and he had a worse amount of not wanting to be rushed into a commitment than most of the male ninja. Anymore, and he'd almost be non-functional. No, she had been unsatisfied with the pace of their relationship before the time loops put all progress on pause. Now it was positively maddening. If one were to describe love as food, feeding a hunger, as in some ways it was, before she had been on short rations, but now the red-eyed female Jonin was starving to death. She didn't need much, but she had to have something. It twisted a person to be all cut off and alone, and she didn't want to go through a metamorphoses into the kind of bizarre creature that made up most of Konoha's high-ranking ninja. Too scared to trust, they isolated themselves from close contact until they turned out, well, like Guy or Kakashi. No, she wasn't going to let that happen to her. She sighed again, for what had to be the fourth or fifth time. Okay. Being paired with Asuma was unsatisfying at the best of times, but the added difficulty of her growing and changing while he didn't, staying tacked just exactly where he was, no. They'd never had enough of a relationship to survive that kind of stress. So, she had to admit to herself at last what she'd been trying to avoid facing for the longest time. Her so-called relationship with the Hokage's son was over. He couldn't give her the kind of love and support she needed. It wasn't his fault, much, okay, parts of it were. Hinata had been so utterly devoted to Naruto that she'd loved him well enough even despite the resets to build an impressive bond between them, and Kuinai doubted if, alone, he could have handled it as well as he'd done. If the Jonin had been in his place, she probably would have started killing people. Again she caught herself trying to distract herself on a tangent. She and Asuma were through, finished, not going anywhere, and even if they did get out of this reset she couldn't see herself going back to him. She'd barely been able to stand the pace of their courtship before she'd gotten all lonely and desperate for more. Now that she was, well, after having been very hungry for a time, nearly starving in fact, the body needs a great deal of nourishment to compensate and rebuild what was lost. The heart was, in many ways, the same. Having been starved for affection, she couldn't just go back to short rations. It wasn't healthy. She'd be wearing green spandex or reading porn in no time. So, her relationship to Asuma was through, over and done with. What was next? It hadn't helped her gritting her teeth over her lack of romance one bit to be den mother to the happiest relationships she'd ever heard of. Naruto and those girls were all bundles of joyous energy and it would have sparked jealousy during the best of times. It didn't help her jealousy much to know that one of those girls was, in fact, older than she was, or that no one, not even Naruto, knew how old he was in mind by then, and it was compounded by that there being more than enough of him to go around. And, also, that he was the only guy in those resets. The Jonin's lips quirked, thinking back to an earlier conversation. Naruto had been lounging around, almost criminally comfortable, in the laps of Ino and Hana, and, just about everybody, actually. Those clones of his were really something else for administering to a girl's desire for snuggles. When one of him had piped up, "People don't like demons, right? 'Cause they hurt things and stuff." Yeah. Tenten looked up from what she'd been doing, curious. Naruto had nodded firmly, as if resolving something that had been bothering him for a long time. Then he'd brightened surprisingly to ask, "Hey, what's the furthest thing from a demon?" Shitsune had actually looked up from what she'd been doing to answer this question. "An angel." Okay, Naruto enfolded all of the girls in hugs. "That's what you are, my angels." It was the sort of heart-meltingly sweet moments like that that made Kuinai want to so strangle Asuma and demand he give her romance or death. She'd even done that once. It hadn't helped. Trouble was, the kid practically dripped that kind of sweetness toward his angels on a regular basis. It made her want to turn in Asuma and ask for a replacement, as this boyfriend was obviously defective. With a grin on her lips, Kuinai got up from where she'd been musing. There was really only one thing to do. It was time she turn in her badge as Den Mother and ask for a full membership in the clan. She had to go get some of that sweetness for herself. And it was time for her to go admit to Anko that her friend had been right all along, that Kuinai had been a fool for not going this way from the start. Anko had been gently for Anko, pressuring her all along to drop her former boyfriend and go with Naruto. That was the reason she'd been out here thinking this through all alone, rather than what she'd usually do, of bouncing her ideas around a chorus of trustworthy girlfriends, as felt far more comfortable and natural to her. The only girls she knew who could even remotely understand were all gently but firmly in favor of her dropping Asuma like a chunk of lead and letting Naruto take over the boyfriend slot in her life. It was about time she took them up on that offer. But, of course, she couldn't retire as Den Mother without electing a suitable replacement. Naruto's angels were taking some time off in one of those casual dress moments that somehow turned into everyone wearing cute pajamas, creating a slumber party atmosphere, when Kuinai walked in from wherever she'd been, hauling along a non-reset women with her. Several different shades of eyes blinked as the angels took in the newcomer. Most went through a brief summation that went, roughly, and in no particular order: female, not in reset, dark purple hair and eyes, Anbu, possibly Jonin. "Hey, aren't you the girlfriend of Hyatt?" Ino asked, only a heartbeat ahead of some others. "Yugao Uzuki, right?" Tenten asked, just a heartbeat after. Yes. The Anbu straightened up, rubbing her arm where Kuinai had twisted it to bring her along in a manner oddly reminiscent of Anko. "Now, why am I here? Who are you all, anyway?" "You are here mostly because our little Naruto has slacked off in his own training, having gotten distracted by teaching his angels. Am I right?" Anko asked smartly from where she was lounging, reading in her eyes that her long-term friend had finally let her resistance crumple, and was about to join the ranks of the active wives. Well, good for her. Mostly Kuinai nodded to concede the points, both spoken and unspoken. "So, are we getting a new member?" Kin asked, looking just as relaxed as the rest of them. "Well then, welcome to the club." Tamrai waved her welcome from her own cushion, while others were just confused, not having thought of accepting new members in a long time. And that was Kin, who had appeared after a great deal more planning than this. As Yugao goggled at the sound and sand Kunoichi lounging around with the crew from Konoha, Kuinai filled her in, partially. "You see here two of our deep cover agents. Kin, from Sound, has been updating us on their plans. Tamrai, from Sand, has been with us for quite some time, a valuable ally who has taught us some very secret and precious wind techniques usually kept under close safeguard by that village." The Anbu nodded, straightening. "Deep cover. That would explain it, then. They were ninja. Deep cover assignments simply had to happen, and it was usually women who got selected to do them, as they had a far higher success rate. There was a built-in excuse of a bride coming to live in a new town to be with her husband, for one. And often that poor husband never knew he'd married a ninja who was there to spy on them. Well, not unless that Kunoichi got caught and executed, at any rate. No, deep cover assignments were something nobody wanted, and those that had them earned equal measures of respect and pity. So, seeing a couple of admitted deep cover agents lounging before her did a lot to explain to Yugao why she was brought there so roughly. Whatever it was they were about to reveal to her couldn't just have been explained to her out there on the streets, where anybody could have been listening. Kuinai fluffed out her hair. There are 2 things you really ought to know to get started with us, she informed the Anbu. One is that I am retiring from my den mother slot among these girls to go active duty among them, and I'd like you to take over my role, which consists in large part of breaking up whatever disagreements occur among them, which aren't many, and in shielding their activities from the village. I'll still be doing a little bit of the latter, but not as much as I was. I won't have time for it, for one. Yugao nodded. Spy master, or spy mistress in this case. Organizing an intel squad, acting as administrator for them, was never something that you just applied for. You either got selected out of the blue or you didn't get the job. She felt honored to have been chosen, actually. Second part, Kuinai added, still acting casually, is that former Konoha Hokage candidate and now missing ninja Orochimaru is about to attack this village, leading 2 forces, made up in equal parts of ninja from both sand and sound. The village of Sound he actually founded for this purpose, using it as a cheap, expedient way to build up his own ninja force to reduce us. The Anbu swordswoman stiffened in fright. This was major news. Why hasn't the Anbu heard anything? The Hokage ought to be informed at once. Yugao began prepping for action. He has been in no, told her, sadly, softly and sourly. She huffed. So far we haven't been able to convince him as to the strength of our evidence. Kin, Tumrai, why don't you get changed and go with her to report to the Hokage in person on this issue? Kuinai told them, before turning to Yugao. After you come back, we'll have you meet with Naruto. There are some things that have to be taken care of before you can join our group. Giving her predecessor a curt but certain nod, the Anbu waited impatiently while those girls named changed into outdoor attire. Then she darted off to herd them to the Hokage, bearing their safety till the secret was delivered as her paramount concern. The deep cover pair were probably going to die after revealing their IDs to deliver this vital warning, but that was hardly her immediate concern. No, her first priority was to get that information to the Hokage. Only after that could she spare the mental cycles toward running the extraction protocols to get them out of those dangerous deep cover roles. So, why did you recruit her, really? Anko sidled up to her long-term friend after the Anbu had gone. They didn't bother to discuss why she'd sent her off to report to the Hokage, as that was just way too obvious. You couldn't start out announcing, hey, we're all caught in a time loop, would you care to join us? No, the first time or two you had to treat everything normal, until they could come to accept that other bit of important information on their own, after it could be backed up by personal observations. Anything else, you'd only be wasting your breath, causing them to doubt your sanity or wondering what odd deceptions you'd been trying to pull. It was seeing that fight with Neji, Kuinai admitted, sitting down. Noting she had the eyes of Hinata on her, she elaborated, none of us are going to be fast enough to beat him no matter how much of the gentle fist we learn. Our muscles are static, for the moment. So even after we have the skill, our bodies just won't be able to match his speed. Anko was nodding, having already figured out the next bit. So, the new chick is your answer? The illusion mistress nodded. I'm sorry, what? Hinata had gotten thrown by this odd turn and wanted an explanation. Hinata, dear, her Jonin instructor smiled for her, but it was a stressed-out smile. You'll never beat your cousin at your clan's art. You just won't do it, not while we can't improve our speed, at any rate. So I brought in a sword expert. She paused, hoping it would be self-evident, but Hinata only blinked at her, wordlessly asking for an explanation. Anko smirked. Swords haven't got chakra points, kid. You stick your hand out to punch the creep and what happens? He touches you first, closing off important points and defeating your blow before it even happens. So, you stick out a sword to make your attacks instead. Even if he blocks it, there is nothing there for him to touch and shut down. It's sharp metal, and that's all it's got to be. We don't have to obtain even a fraction of his speed, as we've suddenly got a ton more reach. He's got the length of the blade, 3 or more feet, he's got to get through unhurt before he can hurt you. And that means once we've got enough skill to where he cannot cross that 3 or 4 feet safely, he's in real trouble, as we create a combat zone where he can't hurt us, but we can easily hurt him. And, as our skill increases, we can force him to stay in that zone where he is getting hurt and we aren't. There are ways and abilities to defeat sword users, Kunai admitted. But just as many counters for them. It's like wire use, not ideal for everything, but very valuable when and where it is useful. Tools give us advantages, Kiddo Anko smirked, stretching out like a cat. That's why after hundreds of years people keep using them. Well, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm excited to learn what she has to teach us. Tenten blurted out enthusiastically. Tenten dodged the shuriken and ducked a blow at her face, responding with a triple uppercut out of 3 directions, 1 punch, 1 kick, and her tail, the end of which was glowing with 1,000 birds technique. It had been simplicity itself to engineer one of those resets where Kakashi snuck Sasuke out of the forest of death to teach him that prized technique, then replace the spoiled Avenger with one of themselves, suitable outfitted with a stolen Sharingan, of course. Then, on one of them having learned it, they could share that technique with the entire clan, naturally. Naruto tried dodging out of the way of the incoming blows, blocking the punch and evading the kick, only to get nailed by the lightning-tipped tail and vanish, the sparring clone dispersing instantly under the blast. A round of applause came from the watching clan members at Tenten's new move. Naruto was an expert at dodging by now, so to nail him with anything was quite an accomplishment. To hit him with anything so lethal even more so, as he devoted extra attention to getting out of the way of those. Of course, as Tenten stood there blushing, flush with her victory, she had to admit most of how she'd hit him had been in the new tail technique, not that it was tipped with 1,000 birds, they'd been using a variety of jutsu to tip it for a while now. Stinger-type attacks where something deadly tipped the tail were one major aspect of their new style. Flinging about fireballs and other projectile attacks with it was only slightly more popular. No, the new aspect of her tail attack was in adapting Orochimaru's flexible body technique to it. That had come about only after a substantial amount of work with the Kyuubi. But where their tails used to have reach no longer than their bodies, with the added bonus of Orochimaru's body flexibility applied to it, Tenten had proved that she could now stretch hers about 20 feet away, lightning quick. That meant an ability to strike a close combat opponent out of any angle, and really added to the potential unpredictability of her attacks. So the applause were more than merited. For the next test, Hinata sent out a clone of her own to spar with Tenten's, so they could see how the gentle fist style measured up against the new moves, and see if they had to be adapted any. After testing it against Hinata, Tumrai would be next to see how the new style performed in a more traditional ninja battle, one mixing up elemental techniques and other ninjutsu moves and attacks in amongst the martial art combat moves and strikes. She would be followed by Hana, using her clan's style. But the crown jewel of this demonstration would be trying out their own style versus the Uchiha clan martial art. It had been just as easy to arrange for Sasuke to be caught as a Poo wielder again and ambushed by Itachi as it had been to replace him and learn the Thousand Birds. And, by stealing Kakashi's Sharingan again, then sending in waves of various clones, see how the infamous Uchiha traitor had dealt with them, in the process learning the Uchiha clan fighting style from a master. So, with that style on tap to be taught among the clan members, they had that much more ability to not only draw on it for inspiration to drive the progress of their own style, but to test it against one probable opponent, and not incidentally, a style created by stealing the best moves in all of the elemental countries. No, it would take a while to fully incorporate and test things, but they were confident of having a style worth possessing once they were done with this. One didn't draw an effective martial art out of thin air. Anyone who created a martial art already had to know something about fighting, and the more one knew the better their potential style could be. That's really all a martial art was, carefully thought through and condensed fighting experience, with a ton of contemplation done on the factors that make it work to optimize those. But with all this material to adapt from and test against, they were well on their way to having something useful to call their own in the Kitsune clan. It was still in the beginning stages, but the outlook looked promising. Over in the next training field, other clones of the Kitsune clan were out practicing their whisker technique, blindfolded and learning to dodge on the prompting of subtle air pressure waves alone. And out in the forests around Konoha, they also had clones, only those were learning to use their ears to great effect in tracking the local wildlife. Hana was leading another group of clones out in the forests on the other side of town doing the same thing, only with their noses, using the Inuzuka clan techniques to heighten their senses of smell. Once all of this came together, it had promised to be very useful indeed. Anko looked out on the training yard and smirked. Oddly enough, while some of the girls had begun gently floating the question of stopping the resets, the call had been made not to do so just yet. One could see the girls' side of things. The resets did limit them in many important ways, and while they could sidestep much of the worst of the aspects, it was still uncomfortable not to be able to progress naturally. The prevailing opinion was that since everything seemed to be based upon Naruto's success in the Chunin tests, they really ought to be able to get out of the time loop once he made Chunin. And, since they now knew of a pattern that made the village love him, overcoming their hate and thus their unwillingness to promote him, they could conceivably do that. But Anko had argued vehemently against it. The first of her arguments was the invasion. No matter how they reset so far, there had always been some major casualties in Konoha, and this was their hometown. They were supposed to protect and save it. So she wanted to keep those resets going, at least until they could stop the invasion effectively, at minimal cost. On the other hand, Sand was Tomrai's hometown. Already weakened by the stupid and self-destructive policies of their daimyo reducing their ninja force on purpose, the dreadful losses they incurred during the invasion did that town no good at all. And it was Tomrai's home. So she did want to save it. On that note, Tomrai had actually looked into what happened to the Kazekage, her father, during one full-length reset. Naruto had never paid any particular attention to it, he just knew the old guy had died sometime during the fighting. Tomrai had been fuming after she'd discovered Orochimaru's deception, that her father had been dead for quite some time, months even, and that the snake Sannin had been impersonating him, having taken his place in order to falsely use his office to push the whole invasion deal forward. It had been hard for Tomrai to forgive Naruto for not noticing that earlier. In some ways Anko could forgive him for not noticing, as the revelation happened in a split second during which Naruto had always been busy with other things, mostly with his angels. In fact, as he'd started acquiring brides not long after going into full-length resets, and they were understandably important to him. Taking care of them had been his priority. However, her ninja side was disgusted over anyone who could overlook such an important strategic detail, especially after they'd started to track the old freak's movements around town. That was an inexcusable failure on the intel side of things, and such things could cause a great deal more harm to him, his growing family, and their village, than not hanging around to pamper them. Not that she was in any way opposed to the pampering. It's just Arag. Kunai had put it best. She hadn't been speaking of this situation, but it still applied here. Don't be afraid to replace something good with something better. It was good to be concerned about one's spouses. But their safety would have been better addressed by properly identifying all of the threats going up against them. And it's not like the kid had any shortage of clones. So, properly chastened, all of the Kitsune clan were now scouring the town for additional information. Everyone was doing it, not just Naruto, and they were not only concerned about stuff pertaining to the resets, but also for potential use later on, after they hopefully got out of the loop. Now they could go way out on limbs and not suffer the consequences. After they got out, that would no longer be the case. Everybody had a clone or two devoted to that, more or less all of the time. It was their hope to know the whole town in minute detail before they called an end to the resets, as that sort of knowledge would be what enabled them to put a stop to the deaths occurring during the invasions and such. Tamrai was also insisting they make some trips out to Sund. It was her hometown, and only a 3-day walk away. It ought to be easy to get there, and that could open up whole new things to do. Not only could they be performing the same data gathering there as here, but there were skills at use in Sand that were not to be found in Leaf. Their weaponsmiths were generally better, for one thing, and that had both Tenten and Yugao all googly-eyed and eager. Once Naruto had learned those smithing techniques, then all of their clan's equipment would be better. So those trips were definitely on the agenda. And not just to Sand, but to all of the ninja villages within reach, both major and minor. Why aren't we out of this? Yugao, who was still new to the whole reset scene, groused from beside her. Everything gets so confusing. Some days I have no idea if they are tomorrow or yesterday. We should call an end to the whole thing. It's clear these are linked to Naruto's progress, though the exam, we should just get him to pass. From where she was standing beside her, Anko looked out on the training ground again and resumed her smirk. Ino, Ayam and Hana all agree with you, she told the Jonin. They've grown distant from their families, and they hate that. But then, why don't we just get out? Yugao pled. My boyfriend. She stopped herself from admitting how fast the man was becoming boring. Exactly, your boyfriend, Anko agreed. That's Tsunad's reason. She says that we have here a priceless opportunity for medical research. All sorts of things that are too risky to be ethical can be tried out here without doing any permanent harm to anyone. The research benefits that come out of trying long-shot procedures help us learn how to do things, and not just do them, but do them well, even get fully mastered, things like curing Hayat's cough. If not for these time loops, that never would have happened. So she wants to draw these out until we've completely conquered a few of the more pressing ailments around. Yes, but she's a medic, of course she'd want that. Yugao snapped, not feeling at all kind over such an ambition. What good was her boyfriend's health if she didn't want him as her boyfriend for much longer? And then there's Tenten's reason, Anko continued. The girl's got a point in that, until we've got our own fighting style, we'll never be counted among the great clans. So she's working like a trooper to get the rest organized in trying out her ideas, and you've got to admit their progress. Yugao sighed. Yes, she had to admit that. In fact, that thought brought her eyes out over to the training field. Out there on the grounds stood over 100 clones, over a dozen from each member of the Kitsune clan. Now normally one practiced with swords using blunted or even wooden weapons, as that way one could limit painful accidents. But it also led to bad habits that could, and often did, get novice sword users killed in their first few real fights, before they ironed those out. Naruto's idea had been plain, yet simple, using shadow clones to practice the moves and do all of the sparring using real swords. It didn't hurt as much as getting a real wound when a clone got destroyed, but it did teach real skills in an effective way, and without any of the bad habits that usually crept in. The fact that the real people were resting in clumps around the field meant that they could create new clones at need, so long as their chakra held out, at any rate. But the new clones got created from a fully rested state, so the sheer amount of training they could get in during one day was simply unreal. Even without the resets, they'd have been shooting up the skill ladder at a very impressive pace. As it was, Konoha was going to have a crop of master rank swordsgirls, and one swordsman, appearing out of nowhere. Well, near masters, at any rate. The only thing preventing them all from becoming full masters was the lack of physical changes due to their training. One's effectiveness at armed combat, martial arts, or any kind of fighting, even flinging about ninjutsu techniques, was really determined on the base level by power and speed, and for them those were not, could not, change during the resets. However, one's basic ability, or raw talent, got multiplied by the skill you'd developed. One could teach a certain amount of skill in organized training, and they did so. Everybody taught their raw genin what they could to get them off to a good start. But what really forged that into something usable was the experience in real-life application that came after the teachers had done all they could for you. And, right now, the Kitsune clan could go out and get all of the experience they wanted simply by fighting in the Chunin exams, or the later invasion, and take on their choice of a wide range of opponents as they did so. And it was exactly that type of experience that made ninja deadly. Most didn't survive to get it, but thanks to the resets, death was not much of a blockage to them. So they could go ahead and take those risks and learn from the lessons they could from them anyway. It was going to lead to them being among the most deadly sword users in history, and Tenten was doing the exact same thing to refine that new martial art she was working on, with others' help. In a short while, they were going to be very dangerous indeed. And, one had to admit the benefit of having an S-ranked missing ninja to be your sparring opponent, as well. Orochimaru did enter the village and they did seek him out to get opportunities to fight him. Most of the time he simply played with them. Then, if they pressed him hard enough he'd wipe them out almost casually. But there was nothing like that for showing you your weaknesses. And, without that ability to die, over and over, pushing yourself in real combat situations, they'd be decades perfecting their style otherwise. So, once we get those fighting styles down and cured every disease in Konoha, do we get out then? Yugao asked, sighing. Not yet, girl. Anko gave her a nasty grin. There's also my reason. Over a dozen years ago Konoha let Orochimaru go, when we could have killed him. Old man Sarutobi had that guy dead to rights, caught in the act of committing his horrible crimes. But the old guy couldn't bear to strike at his favorite student, so he let him go. Anko's face was blank. Back then old Snake Face was much weaker than he is now. Sarutabi could have killed him. Arashi could have killed him. Back then we had Kakashi's dad, so the White Fang of Konoha could have killed him. Also, Rocha-chan didn't have any real advantages over his teammates, so we had the other two Sanin, and they were closely enough matched that, given a trivial amount of support, either one of those could have killed him. And that isn't the whole list, there are others who, between them, almost surely could have destroyed the pale-faced traitor. Anko was now gripping a kunai, and Yugao was able to tell how much this angered her. Put all of the ninja we once had together, and it would have been a trivial thing for them to have destroyed Orochimaru. But instead, the soft-hearted old fool let him go. So now that traitor we could have killed so easily is back, and now the tables are turned. We've gotten weaker while he has gotten stronger. So we, who could have killed him so easily before, are now in danger from him, as his plan comes real close to destroying Konoha. That man's former apprentice drew in a deep breath, and looked steadily over to the new girl, stating clearly, no more. No more second chances for that freak. He turned his back on us and everything we stand for. We let him go, and he came back to kill us. That's it. No more chances for him to get it right next time. Without Naruto's little accident with time, Orochimaru would have killed our Hokage and devastated the town, while cutting our ninja forces down sharply and severely weakening our one major allied village. That's too close. He doesn't get another chance so he could get it right next time. We don't leave these resets until we know how to kill him. He's got to be dead and decaying in his grave before I'll let Naruto graduate. Yugao blinked as her companion got up and angrily stomped off. Watch your hands. The Yugao clone out on the practice field called out to the students she was teaching, ignorant of this little dialogue on the sidelines. You can't hold a sword if you don't have any hands. And they are a cheap, easy to strike, low-risk target if you aren't more careful of them. Proving her point, she almost casually swept off the fingers of an Ino clone, causing that girl's shadow construct to explode into a cloud of smoke. Ayam lowered herself on a line of ninja wire to where she could just barely see past the upper lip of the open window. Raising the blowgun to her lips, she exhaled sharply, and the women within that room crumpled as the sleep powders did their work. Quickly slipping inside and using swift, economical motions, she stripped the woman out of her daytime clothes and put her back in her sleepwear before placing the woman back into bed and putting on her clothes herself. Then, using a shape change to look identical to the woman she'd just knocked out, she left that bedroom by the inside door and called out, "I'm ready for the day, Daddy." Having stealthily observed her target's routine, she knew all of her lines and schedule for the day. The girl's father looked up from where he was entering the kitchen himself and smiled. "Just in time, my little dumpling. You ready to learn how to bake with Daddy today?" "Sure, Daddy. I'm ready." "I am in," the little girl disguise called out. "Good." The man replied, reaching for a flour bucket. "Help me start these sweet rolls." As she was outwardly rushing to help, inwardly Ayam grinned in triumph. The ramen chef's daughter was going to become the best cook in Konoha, even if she had to resort to her husband's methods to do it. Naruto watched where Jiraiya quivered under the sexy paradise illusion. The old man would never teach him anything until he'd gotten some reason to, but after having been under that illusion once, he'd literally teach him anything he knew to go under it again. So the boy's knowledge of seals was really taking off, which, in some ways that was odd, as the rest of his life was turning and twisting around. Take his lifelong goal as an example. Naruto realized that the satisfaction he'd always imagined would come out of being Hokage, he already had. And it hadn't come out of any of the goals he'd been told were cool, or important. No. All of the happiness now in his life came out of the relationships he'd formed with his angels. Being loved and respected had completely filled that empty hole in his life. He no longer felt any desire to be Hokage, as that would only take time away from things he'd rather be doing, and everything he once thought he'd get out of that role, he already had. Of course, considering Orochimaru and those cloud-garbed underpantsless guys, along with other threats he could presume were out there, Naruto still wanted and felt he needed the skills to be Hokage. It was just the hat that no longer had any interest for him. Of course, dangerous are the underpantsless ones was Ino's favorite statement to make these days, always spoken in ominous whispers. And, silly as it was, she had a point. According to sound information fed through Kin, those Akatsuki guys needed demon containers, so they would be coming after Naruto no matter what rank he held. The Kitsune clan had been having enough trouble defeating one S-rank ninja coming after Konoha, and that was with near infinite opportunities to get it right. The thought of 9 of them coming after Naruto specifically was downright chilling, and worse yet, they hadn't made much of an appearance during these time loops, so there was little opportunity to learn their weaknesses or how to fight against them. Itachi was an exception, as they knew of a pattern that made him come to town. So, sadly for Sasuke, he was going to be outed as a poo wielder many times in the resets to come, as the clan had to have more information on Itachi, how he fought and how they might get him to die, and the most reliable way they had to get him was to have Sasuke revealed as this great scatological wonder, so his older brother would come to town and kill him. Then the clan could ambush him with small clone armies, lose, and repeat a few times, learning more about him and his fighting style each time. Of course, to really mine that for information, they really ought to have some form of defense against that illusion technique Itachi was so fond of, as they didn't get much data out of being caught in 3-day illusions with the amazing missing ninja sticking a sword through them. And that was a big part of what brought Naruto back to Jiraiya over and over again, as he was convinced there really ought to be a seal array that could be developed to counter that illusion before it was even cast. In order to take over your mind and turn it into his own personal playground, Itachi had to using some form of energy, after all, probably mental, but the direction, blocking and manipulation of energy was what seals did. So, if they could learn how to craft a seal that could catch hold of Itachi's illusion before it caught hold of them, they could theoretically turn it back on him, or use it to trap his body, or manipulate it in other ways to their advantage. Even just being immune to the whole hold still while I torture, then kill you aspect of that would be nice. Itachi relied way too much on that illusion of his for it not to weaken his style to be deprived of it. And so Naruto wanted even more than ever to expand what he knew of seals. 2 women stood on a rooftop overlooking the Hyuga compound, the wind whipping their hair. "Are you certain this is the only way?" Shitsune asked her mentor. Tsunade nodded decisively. "Absolutely positive. She just doesn't learn like a human does. No matter how hard I try to teach her, she doesn't pick it up. I even had Naruto order her to try, and she suffers, giving it her best shot but failing anyway. No, by myself I can't teach her. But, having observed Naruto do this on rabbits and other animals, it should work. So, Vicky." Shitsune trailed off, looking mournfully over to the Hyuga compound. Nowhere near comfortable treating one of the most powerful known demons in existence like a pet, the girls had taken to calling the Kyuubi, Vicky, kind of short for Vixen, but not too far off from Naruto's nickname for her of Fluffy. It was just more respectful, and people in town didn't look at them odd when they called her that name out in public. So, when she was in human form, that's what she got called. They'd had some bad experiences getting caught calling her Kyuubi. The freakouts had been massive and intense. The statement of, "So, Kyuubi, what do you think?" was never popular, and often followed by screams. Shaking her head, Shitsune completed her statement. "Naruto isn't going to be happy with this. Neither am I, but I see no other way." The slug Sunin admitted heavily before she drew in a great sigh. "Come on, let's get the rest of the angels convinced. Once we get all of them converted to the necessity of the idea, Naruto will go along. He always does. Right?" Shitsune nodded, before dimpling and trying to smile. "Hey. It's not like they won't get better, right?" Tsunade admitted of a sad grin herself. "Yes, that's one thing these resets are good for. Heaven knows I'd never consider anything like this without M." Later that night Naruto released the Kyuubi's real form out from behind her seal, directly on top of the Hyuga compound, once everyone was inside. The demon was still very weak, not yet fully recovered from her near death after having fallen afar of her sworn oath to destroy Naruto's enemies long ago. In fact, by her own estimation, the Kyuubi still fought at somewhat less than one tail's worth of effectiveness. Still, that was more than enough to wipe out one sleepy clan, caught by surprise. Standing larger than the compound, the released Kyuubi, Vicky was her name for human form, which this most certainly wasn't, and they did want to avoid confusing them lest they call her by the wrong name at the wrong time, set about breaking apart buildings and devouring that clan immediately. It was the only way they knew of to teach her the Hyuga bloodline. Tsunade had determined that, the Kyuubi, being a demon, had a mind that worked in different ways from humans, and she honestly couldn't learn in ways they found comfortable. So, since Naruto was able to learn the forms of animals for copying and shifting to by devouring them, and he'd gained that ability from her decorations, they assumed that the Kyuubi memoized forms the same way. And the precious Hyuga bloodline was something that made up their forms. The reason the demoness hadn't memoized all of the bloodlines in the world this way was that it required a rather large number of the same type of thing to be devoured at the same time for a demon on her scale to even notice. And the few times that had happened in her past, she hadn't been paying any attention, not deeming what she was eating important. So, on Naruto's orders, having been convinced by his wives, including a stone-faced Hinata, the Kyuubi broke forth and devoured the entire Hyuga clan like an anteater breaking into a termite mound. Hinata was the obvious exception. Nobody thought of her as a Hyuga anyway, as she was the founding wife of the Kitsune clan. There weren't enough Uchihas in existence to get the Sharingan the same way. Not like any of them were inclined to try, as they found the whole thing distasteful to an extreme. In fact, those in the reset stayed very far away so they didn't have to watch as the Kyuubi was first released, then fed, which turned into a battle that ended when she was defeated by Sarutobi using that sealing technique again. With the Hokage dead, and mass portions of the town destroyed, the council called the Chunin exams off and they reset the next morning, still feeling very guilty about what they'd done, and determined not to do it again. Most were actively resolving to make it up to that clan, somehow. But still, the Kyuubi very sheepishly added the Hyuga's acquired bloodline to the rest of her decorations on the Kitsune clan, having been successful. Only this modification they ended up hiding, so instead of blank, white pupil-less eyes, they had their normal eye colors, with pupils. and the veins on their temples didn't bulge outrageously when they activated it. The increased blood flow required being run along more internal lines. A minor cosmetic effect, but a very important one for concealing their new advantages. And concealing them avoided all sorts of uncomfortable questions. Toward that purpose, Hinata elected to have her own natural eye color shifted from Hyuga white to match Naruto's beautiful cerulean blue, and while she was at it her hair shifted to the same shade of blue, adjusted at the follicles so it would always grow that way. It was their hope that by doing so they could avoid all future trouble with the Hyuga clan insisting on putting a caged bird seal on her, as they could state, with some accuracy, that their own bloodline powers had overridden Hinata's. She would disguise herself under various forms of transformation as needed. Mostly, however, her contact with her home clan was limited to leaving that compound on mornings just after a new reset, and never going back until the next reset had her waking up in her bed there again. They'd never been terribly kind to her. Unfortunately, while it had been their intention to disguise their newly acquired bloodline powers completely, they did not pull it off with complete success. The Kyuubi only knew the way the Hyugas were, and after devouring a clan full of them could have copied that over directly, no problem, but it would have had no changes at all from the original. So Tsunade had worked with her exhaustively to say, shift this here, drop this tray there, change this so it works differently etc. And, given the Kyuubi's handicap, it had been a miracle how much success they'd had. The one thing that had been overlooked was the irises of the eyes turning white whenever the special vision powers were activated. So there was still a telltale of that portion of their newly expanded bloodline powers being in use. Considering that the powers, once added to the bloodline, would be fixed and not subject to change, so there was no experimenting possible to get it just right, it was remarkable that things worked as well as they did. Dad. Naruto stammered out, tremulously. The fourth Hokage offered no response. Looking over to see Tsunade, who was struggling with her own feelings over her similarly unresponsive brother, he shifted his desperate gaze to Shitsune, who was currently struggling with the impure resurrection technique. It's not really what we'd expected, the medic admitted, sweating under the strain. He's there, but at the same time he's not. It's more like a puppet technique than a person, and his contribution is more like him being on the other end of a radio and preoccupied than present. I'm sorry. I could make him talk, but it's like I'm interrupting something important on his end. Crying tears freely, Naruto turned away from the animated corpse currently possessed by the ghost of his father and found comfort in the arms of Tsunade, who was overcome by grief over the same problem at the same time. Those girls who'd been looking on, expecting a joyful reunion, were themselves depressed, but swept in to offer soothing words of comfort and nurturing caresses anyway. One thing that really ought to have been obvious, but, being former candidate for Hokage, Orochimaru was tough. Konoha hadn't had a weak or wimpy Hokage yet. In fact, all those that had held the spot so far were legendary ninja even after their times had passed. Most didn't realize just how much work that took, or what kind of successes that required, to be remembered even after you were no longer a threat. Ninja were, by and large, a very practical sort of people, far too preoccupied by things that might actually kill them, or acquiring ways to kill others, to be much bothered by sentimental sorts of history. You had to really make an impression on them for any sort of shinobi to recall you for long after you'd ceased to be a danger to them. Orochimaru had been seriously considered for the position of Hokage, and it had not been any lack of talent, drive or effectiveness that got him passed over for the job. He'd had all of the skills required. No, he'd gotten turned down for psychological reasons. But being a psycho didn't make him any less dangerous of a ninja. And he'd been on a ceaseless quest since then, tirelessly acquiring more and more power long after his competitors for that position had either gone to seed or died off. So his power levels had only been increasing since the time he'd been thought a viable Hokage candidate. It would take an Uchiha-obsessed fangirl to possess such a wasted sense of judgment as to believe that wasn't going to make for a very, very nasty ninja. Having started from kid level, and only improved since then, Anko was correct to fear him, as in a few more years he ought to be truly unstoppable. He came awfully close as it was. Spiraling sphere. Orochimaru laughed as his chest got destroyed by the impure resurrected fourth Hokage's legendary attack bored a hole through the snake Sannin's chest and converted his torso to ribbons of bone and flesh. QQQQ. Orochimaru laughed, despite no longer having lungs to do so, collapsing in a heap of empty skin as another, whole hale and healthy of him sprang out of the discarded lower body. Blast! Anko shouted, charging her former master and almost but not quite hitting him with 1,000 birds technique. The old ninja almost lazily dodged the rapidly striking point of her tail, in addition to all of her other attacks. I had no idea the old pervert had perfected the skin-shedding technique. Physical damage just. Drill fangs. Anko was pierced by 2 streams of flying, razor-sharp snake fangs spinning fast and spraying poison as they went. Tsuna dropped her former teammate, crushing his spine to powder with her fist as he concentrated on the technique that took Anko down, only to reveal that what she'd just slain was a corpse animated by the dead soul technique and used to impersonate Orochimaru, who must have gone elsewhere after he'd last saved his life by shedding his skin. Then the group heard the ominous words, "More of the underworld." Orochimaru reacted to whatever level of force attacked him. When set upon by old teammates, dead Hokages, and a cluster of highly skilled Chunin and Jonin, he accepted this as a legitimate threat on his life and responded with the big guns, rather than the teasing and mocking he gave when he felt safe. A chunk of the forest of death that seemed almost a kilometer across fell into a sudden pit of blackness, and they knew no more before the reset. Dash. Ag. As Kyuinai was getting some hot and heavy lip action from Naruto up on the top of the Hokage Tower, in full view of the entire town, Yugao groused down below. When she said I'd have to take over shielding their activities from the village, she did not say she'd be personally setting out to make that more difficult. The swordswoman clenched her fist, vein throbbing on her forehead, before going off to start a rumor that Naruto's teammate Sakura had made a bet with Naruto that he wouldn't kiss her if she was under a transformation to look like a much older woman. The things they made her do to keep the town from thinking Kyuinai was a stinking pedophile. Heck, mentally, the brat was probably older than she was. But would the village understand that? No. So why did they keep making out in public? Do you think we should tell her? I asked Hana, as they both watched the ticked-off woman stalk away. That Kyuinai wants public recognition because Asuma never gave her any. Hana replied. Or that Ino made a bet with her that they wouldn't make out on top of the Hokage Tower. I was thinking Anko's bet that, since the Den Mother slot is all burdens and virtually no benefit, that no one could handle it for more than 100 resets. And that if Yugao didn't snap in 50 or so, Anko would do whatever embarrassing thing she wanted. Once. The ramen chef's daughter offered. No. Hana disagreed, grinning. Kyuinai would love to see her old friend forced to make a pass at Jiraiya. So she'd actually like Yugao to hold out longer. Her making out on top of the tower has nothing to do with that bet. I folded her arms primly. Making passes at known perverts goes well beyond embarrassing, so that's out of bounds for the bet. Anko only put herself up for public shame, not a near certainty of rape. Hannah thought about it, then agreed. Okay, you're right. That's out of bounds. Sorry. So, considering what she once dressed like, being made to run streaking through town might not embarrass her. So what would? Both women thought for a long moment about Anko's former usual clothing style, and looked at each other, speechless, unable to come up with anything. Yeah, I've been learning tons of seals. Naruto boasted proudly in response to a question concerning his progress. Really? To do what? Kin asked politely. Naruto froze in that position, stuck in mid-gloat, before he sobered, settling into a thinking pose. You know. To be honest, the old pervert hasn't ever covered practical applications for most of what he's been teaching me. It's all wild stuff and theories. So, could you create a better storage seal? She asked politely. Well, maybe not better, the boy considered. But I sure know a ton of ways to modify things like that now. Modify, like how? Tenten raised her head, suddenly interested. By way of answer, Naruto grabbed a small takeout box from a favorite restaurant whose cuisine Iam had not yet mastered, scribing a quick seal on its bottom, then flipped it back upright. Then, to the amazed gazes of all, he grabbed one of the spear and chain combo weapons Ino had just finished practicing with and lowered it into the tiny box, hand over hand, spear first and then the chain, until it had all disappeared. Jaws were dropping all around that chamber. Naruto! Tsunade shouted, coming over to grab him quick. Why didn't you tell us you could make a seal like that? It's pretty easy. I didn't think it was all that special. He shrugged. Special. Special. She shrieked. You lowered that weapon like you were testing the depth of a well and it never hit bottom. And that box is only 2 inches deep. Down dear Hannah put a hand on her elder's shoulder, having realized some while ago that the legendary medic had too unstable a temper to be a proper alpha, and so having retaken that role upon herself. Bending over to where she could look him in the eye, she asked, Naruto, do you not realize how special what you've done is? The boy innocently shook his head in confusion. Standing up, the clan heiress touched her head in frustration. It would not do to go raring off to kill everyone who had ever taught, or failed to teach, which was the point aggravating her here, Naruto in the Ninja Academy. Such conduct was unbecoming of an alpha. If she was going to do it, that was something she'd had to lead the whole group out on. Instead, she chose to remedy the problem. Vengeance against those responsible could come later. Keen idea. I keep forgetting how many blind spots you've still got in your education. The red-eyed Chunin rose from up off of her seat, striding over seductively to the boy she had married, before drawing a breath to say, Naruto, I know you studied exhaustively under Iruka during this loop, but there are reasons why those classes have more than one teacher. People forget things, even obvious ones, entirely without meaning to. 2 people are significantly less likely to both forget the same pieces of critical information. The Jonin paused before admitting, and really, the circumstances we are in, while ideal for some purposes, also limit the amount of varieties we get our experiences in, so some weaknesses or blind spots don't show up as much. Oh. Tenten challenged her slightly. We've fought with all kinds of weapons against all types of ninja. Just what sorts of experience aren't we getting? Anything long term, for one. Kuinai answered her without ire. Most of the really sucky bits of missions come after you've been on them for a few weeks. Things like being unable to bathe properly, or eat hot meals really suck morale, and can make for increased fatigue, dangers of infection of wounds or just disease. You don't know what a hard mission is until you're deep in enemy territory, filthy and cold, then come down sick with fevers. Though I know we don't advertise it, we've lost quite a few ninja to sickness while on long-term field missions. It's not just wounds that kill. Also, your awareness sharpens as you go out on dangerous missions. Kin added her support to Kyuinai. Being here, our awareness actually dulls. As we know so much of what's going on, we stop paying so much attention. I agree. But before we get too far off on a tangent, Hannah interrupted, as she turned the group's attention back to their mutual husband. Naruto, how much water does a person require to survive? A gallon a day to drink, 2 or 3 in hot climates like sand, and that's not counting other purposes, like wash water for yourself, or cleaning cooking utensils, the boy responded promptly. This was basic ninja stuff. And yet we still lose ninja to dehydration or heat exhaustion. Why do you suppose that is? The Inuzuka clan heiress, who was going to have to find time someday to tell Kiba that was now his job, as she was taking over another clan, pressed, hoping he'd think that over. He was getting pretty good at that lately, but you never could tell when the last shreds of his old, mentally lazy ways would show up. Oh, that's easy. The boy chirped, kicking back and putting his arms behind his fox-eared head. They get lazy, or don't think. Tamrai says that you've got to be sipping constantly to stay healthy in desert heat, and once the water in their canteen runs out, it's not convenient or handy to pull another one out of your storage seals. So they put it off, and don't quite as much water as they need, steadily falling behind, until all of a sudden the little ways they were shorting themselves add up to a major problem. People also forget things. It happens all of the time, Anko added. You get used to finding your water in streams, and you don't think you need it when you go someplace that doesn't have those. You'll find Chunin, or even a few Jonin, out there who simply don't think to carry water, even on desert runs. Using storage seals to carry extra water can also be dangerous. Tamrai posed an addition. Seals make a distinct surge of chakra that is detectable by most ninja, some train to detect that distinct pulse at a considerable distance. Most of the guards around the village of Sand have learned to do it, actually, as it is one of the best ways to detect incoming ninja trying to sneak across the surrounding sands. Canteens only hold about a quart, 4 quarts to the gallon, 3 gallons a day, times however many people you have in a group, and most incoming parties are unsealing new canteens of water all of the time. It makes them real easy to track. People can detect chakra. Naruto blinked, and the girls there all palmed their faces in their hands. Sometime, I swear I'm going to go murder all those so-called teachers at that academy. I swear I will, Anko mumbled into her hands. I'll help, Ino muttered alongside of her, arms folded in anger. That was my education they sabotaged too. They couldn't always send him away to beat erasers or to see the principal, so they had to leave tons of stuff out of the normal lessons to keep him this ignorant. I can't believe how weak a ninja I was until this whole reset business started. Our classmates who didn't have outside instruction from belonging to clans didn't have a chance. That explains quite a few things, actually. Tsunade nodded thoughtfully, while Tenten just fumed. Ever practical Shitsune merely addressed the immediate problem to hand by laying a hand on the boy's shoulder and saying, "Yes, Naruto, most ninja can feel others using chakra. It's a lot like feeling wind on your face, really. You can tell there was something there, and a bit of where it came from, and how strong, but you really have to train hand to learn much more than that. That's why Rocha-chan was able to detect my sentries. The boy slapped a fist into his hand in discovery. All of the time I'd try to spy on him, he knew where I had clones, even when I had them disguised. I put them all over the places where I knew he'd be, and he'd just avoid them, like he knew where they were. The girls all looked at each other seriously. Yes, Naruto, that sounds likely. Shitsune told him, rubbing at the bridge of her nose before hugging him. And while most of us can only detect chakra that is in use, like storage seals being activated or battle techniques fired, or whatnot, he is exactly the sort of person who would train until he could sense even more than that. I don't know how much he could or couldn't do, obviously, but you've always had so very much chakra that it seems reasonable he could detect you even when you were not using it, if he could detect anyone in that state. Naruto was scratching his chin. But and you couldn't catch me, because most of them were using jutsu just to follow along. So they were, in effect, throwing up a smoke screen where there was so much chakra being used, they could never find me. Besides, you never did use much chakra to dodge them, Ino added, proud of him, in her way. At first I couldn't. I didn't know how. But later on I never had to, the boy sheepishly admitted, before turning serious. So, how do you hide from guys who sense your chakra? The girls all face faulted, all save one. How did you guys survive as a ninja country if your teachers were willing to shoot an entire generation of shinobi in the foot just to spite Naruto? Tamrai asked, quite angrily. That's a basic skill. It's like not being able to read. They didn't teach me that, either, Naruto admitted, rubbing the back of his head. Not until the resets started did I convince Iruka to really show me how. Right. That's it. They die. The Sand Maiden seized hold of a sword and started to walk out of the room. Most of those present decided to join her. Naruto was left blinking in shock while Hana stayed behind to explain. The storage seal you showed us is very special, Naruto. Most seals are either on or off, with the items either fully contained or not at all, and they make a pulse each time something gets taken in or out. Yours made no pulse at all that we could detect, and here we all were in the same room. But what difference does that make? Naruto rubbed his head. Hana decided to try another route, seeing as she was coming up against one of those blind spots the boy hadn't yet eliminated himself. Dear, tell me, how much water could you put in a canteen with one of your seals? The boy carelessly shrugged. A couple 100 gallons, easy. So, a several-month supply, even in hot desert terrain, Hana mused thoughtfully, before adding, so, how many canteens would a patrol need? Suddenly the blonde's eyes widened. Yes. Hana nodded, glad to have gotten through. Now you see. If each one in a patrol had a canteen like you could make, they would only need one each. So they wouldn't be opening up storage seals all of the time, so those ninja around the village of San Tamrai just told us of would be unable to track you coming in. Also, like you said before, it's just inconvenient to be opening up storage seals for new canteens all of the time, so people get busy or don't bother, and we get cases of dehydration or heat stroke as people don't drink enough or often enough. This would fix that, as the one canteen they had on their belts could stay full for months. Naruto was nodding. Hana was glad to have overcome one of his remaining blind patches. So, tell me about Tenten's Rising Twin Dragons technique, a short summary only, please. Raising his eyebrows, confused at what she wanted, the boy simply stated, she jumps up in the air, unseals hundreds of weapons out of 2 scrolls, and throws them at her enemies. Again, Hannah nodded, then asked, "Why does she need the scrolls?" "To store things. It'd weigh hundreds of pounds if she..." He stopped. Hannah was grinning, hefting the takeout box. "But this doesn't weigh any more than the paper box that made it up." She turned it over and the spear fell out, making a clatter as it and its chain wound up in a pile on the floor. "So, if Tenton, or all of us, were to have your seals on our shuriken pouches, we could still have those hundreds of pounds of weapons, but could use them even faster as we wouldn't be bothered with the delay caused by clumsy scrolls." Naruto looked around the clan compound. What had formerly been Uchiha estate was bustling with activity. Most of it was him, of course. They had a busy day. As the first morning of a new reset, there was so much to be done it was almost scary. Scary, that was, until it became routine. It took a lot of work to support his wives in the manner to which they had become accustomed. Over there in the smithies, clones were busily working away. Making things the ordinary way just required way too much time, anymore, even with the near-infinite manpower at his disposal, so they were using crafting techniques built on the same concepts and principles as ninja powers, molding chakra to achieve effects in seconds instead of hours. He'd started on this principle when he'd first begun to work titanium, but the cat had been let out of the bag, so to speak. Once he'd started using his own specially created, unique jutsu to craft one thing, it had been natural, unavoidable even, to move on to doing the same with others. But, while crafting something, say a suit of armor, directly out of raw materials was possible, he found he got an inferior result that way. So, out there in those smithies, clones of Naruto were working on mixing alloys that were dang near unbreakable up to Chunin levels of strength, to making welds, cutting, shaping, polishing and finishing out suits of armor, and the typical wide assortments of weapons, to which seals would then be added. There were quite a variety of ninja tools under construction there, from wire and shuriken to caltrops and swords and on and on. Nor were they working on that alone. They were also producing delicate chandeliers for the house, and glassware and tableware and pottery of all shapes and descriptions for using to decorate the old place. Cloth goods of all varieties were also in production, clones using hand seals and chakra techniques to collect fibers out of the surrounding forests, weave those into stunningly beautiful fabrics, which they then turned into plain or exotic garments, bed linens, towels, curtains, rugs and tapestries, using more specially created tailoring jutsu. Those outfits ranged across entire wardrobes, and included not only the seals he'd created for making the outfits self-adjusting to growing young bodies, mirroring a user's chakra so they could mimic a body's developments, but whole new sets of useful or otherwise convenient seals. Seals to keep clothes, curtains and bed linens clean had been an obvious next step up from simply always fitting right. And from there it had been an easy step to creating clothes that would resist tearing, and the experiments to do that had yielded results more positive than he ever would have imagined at first. In short order they'd gone from a "wouldn't it be neat if we could get this delicate lace to stop tearing?" all of the way up to, "Gosh, who would have guessed that so simple a seal would make this underwear as strong as mesh ninja armor?" But there was a lot to be said for clothing that looked normal, or fabulous, as situations called for, but that could stop blows better than an Anbu vest. He was very busy adapting those to strengthen the clan's armor to even tougher levels, as it would be nice to stand up to more of the treatment one received in the punishing environment of ninja combat. Then there were also seals, probably Naruto's pride and joy, that created an internal layer of opaque chakra within the clothes themselves that would put a stop to special visual powers. The Hyuga's white eyes couldn't see through it, and the Sharingan couldn't copy or predict any movements of a person wearing it, making both of those prized bloodlines utterly useless for fighting against a person wearing it. That seal array deserved to be a pride and joy. Unfortunately, they weren't yet finished with final touches. As it was, the seals blocked penetrating chakra sight perfectly, but he hadn't yet made a way that could not only do that, but that also wouldn't interfere with the use of chakra techniques by the person wearing it. As it was, though, it made for perfect jumpsuits to grant Lee and Guy the ability to stomp on any Sharingan or White Eye users who deserved it. Even though Naruto could, and often did, cure Lee's coils and teach him a year's worth of chakra techniques in 2 minutes, the enthusiastic fellow genin did well enough even without them that, garbed in sealed clothes, he became deadly to those 2 major bloodline users, and he could smack Neji around like a white-eyed racquetball. And Naruto was getting closer to having a perfect version of those seals all of the time, one that did not interrupt the user's chakra, but that blocked all of those special sight powers completely. They were also making jewelry, something he felt far more critical than either the combat gear or the housewares, and that wasn't because his wives all thought his creations of jewels and precious metal laces were pretty, although, privately, he did admit that was a factor, albeit a small one. No, most of what he was doing he'd gotten started on by having the wedding rings of his wives store their outfits for them. That was a concept that just begged to be built upon. Tsunade had finally gotten around to explaining to him the secrets behind her own special seals, both of them, the one that sustained her permanent illusion, a disguise she no longer needed to look young, and the one storing chakra that could be released in a burst to regenerate her instantly, and whose side effects had once aged her prematurely. Youth and regeneration they already had out of their bloodline, so he learned them just on general principles to learn everything he could. But what really spiked his interest was the less celebrated support elements of each seal. Naruto was currently designing jewelry that could store large amounts of chakra more or less permanently, gathered in tiny amounts over time and released either partially or all at once to refuel the wearer's reserves. So that his angels, who had large chakra reserves but nowhere near close to his own, could throw large amounts of costly jutsu for much longer. It was groundbreaking. It could change Shinobi combat forever. Chakra was the life and soul of Shinobi combat. It didn't matter if what they used were illusions, wall walking or high-power jutsu, they all used chakra, and when that ran out a ninja was dead, out of options and unable to maneuver, much less fight effectively. Simply put, as a general rule, the more chakra you had the more dangerous and effective a ninja you could be, and the ability to restore chakra reserves from batteries made stuff possible that could never be risked otherwise, allowing ninja to throw around potentially 10 to 20 times as many jutsu before running dry, multiplying their effectiveness in the field. And he was going to make dang sure that secret never got out of his clan. He'd seen enough of the sand/sound invasion to know how destructive ninja could be to the surrounding territory when they went to war. He didn't want just anyone being able to fling about 10 to 20 times as many chakra techniques before running out, and Tsunade had been careful as she'd taught him her secrets to make it clear that certain things, her unique techniques among them, were so precious and valuable that if anything could be done to have them, there were ninja out there who'd do it. If there was any way at all to steal these chakra batteries, they'd be stolen, and then stolen and stolen again until every ninja country had them. At that point it wouldn't even change the balance of power. If everyone had the knowledge of how to create these seals, then everyone would balance out compared to each other. The only effect it would have would be to make ninja combat that much more destructive. The losers in that would be the non-ninja whose homes and farms got destroyed during those battles. Of course, Naruto really had to admit to himself that the real reason he was doing this was because he couldn't stand the concept of any of his precious people being hurt, and any advantages in their possession decreased the danger they were all in. However, if everyone had it, it wasn't an advantage, so it couldn't protect them. And he was selfish. He wanted to protect them. With every fiber of his being he yearned to be able to keep them safe from all harm that might befall them. And, if that meant keeping Shinobi techniques secret, he'd put all of the brilliantly devious powers of his agile mind to work on it. The trouble with seals was they could be copied. They were just written words and symbols, after all. You could compress a diagram from yards across to palm-sized, but the whole diagram was still there, and there were a number of ways to read it despite the tiny print. Some Shinobi used extra, unnecessary bits integrated into the design to help throw off any potential copiers, but that didn't work out very well. There were few seals indeed that hadn't become general after their introduction. Orochimaru's cursed seals were one, but they'd already broken those. There wasn't anyone in the Kitsune clan at this point who couldn't apply, modify or remove Orochimaru's famous cursed seal. So that left the only really unique ones left in existence as Tsunades, and those had only really ever stayed a secret because the only copies were on her and the real text of each was disguised by her permanent illusion. So, sneaking a kunoichi into a hot spring with her wouldn't help to read them. To get access, someone would have to defeat her so she could be subdued and studied in detail at length. So far that hadn't happened. However, there had been many tries to invent a seal that could not be stolen, so that it could be spread about among his angels who'd use it without risking its loss to someone else, and starting a cascade to where everyone had it, required some very devious thinking. Fortunately, that was what Naruto could be said to be best at. At last, it was his chakra exercises that gave him the idea, specifically the earth-typed ones. Sitting on a rock, letting his chakra ooze out into the dirt and stones below him, had taught him a great deal more about geology than just about anyone else knew. At first he didn't know much about the names other people assigned to stuff, but after a trip to the library to look up books on geology he found those out. And although there were hundreds of different types of rocks, most of them were just the same few elements organized in slightly different ways. Quartz was the single most common element in the world's crust, making up hundreds of worthless stones. However, organized just right it made citrines and amethysts. Carbon was really common, and yet put together just right it made up diamonds. Silica was just common sand, and yet from that arose beryl and, with the right coloring agents, such gems as rubies, sapphires, emeralds, topaz and onyx. Then the same element that made up plaster and concrete could also be organized differently into lovely alabaster. Limestone compressed became marble. It was actually a simple principle, once he'd figured out that part, to use his chakra to organize minerals differently and create his own gemstones. Of course, the worth of those stones was based not only in their beauty, but also in their rarity. So letting anyone know that he could create his own would sort of defeat the purpose, and gem prices would only plummet. They'd cost only as much as the sand he made them from. However, the ability to create gemstones gave him a medium no one else could use as a basis for drawing seals and hiding them. Naruto had decided that he would draw his seals in 3 dimensions, which required inventing a whole new branch of the sealing art to accomplish, and thus by itself virtually ensured proper security, on the inside of gemstones, using tiny fracture lines and flaws as his pen and ink. Ideally, no one would even guess they were there, but just in case he made those flaws too small to be easily found even with a jeweler's loupe, at least not in enough detail to be read. He'd also draw additional seals to cover them in a permanent illusion of a flawless stone. Then, just in case that illusion could be found and dispelled, and some method of seeing those lines clearly enough to copy could be devised, he resolved to input not just one or two, but dozens of seals interweaved with each other like the links of chain, except that chain would be a three-dimensional web so that even if the lines could be clearly seen, the outer layers would render the inner ones indecipherable just by their presence. Having multiple nested layers of security, they might actually be secure. Naturally enough, it would be the unique seals on the innermost layers, while more common ones made up the outer ones. It would require very large gems to fit this in, but size was no problem to him. What really caused him worry now was finding enough things for those stones to do to make up the outer layers of the sealing web. He'd already got them to store themselves, vanishing if they got removed from the body of the user. They would be programmed as a final security measure to only function for a specific girl, or, he supposed, her kids. Actually, tying it to the bloodline would probably be better, that way they could all interlace and help each other out, but he could give each jewelry set an affinity for the girl he was making it for. Sigh. This was getting so complicated. The Kitsune clan had a happy, bustling compound filled with energy. It also had all of the most modern ninja advances, invented by Naruto himself. A tremendous amount of work went into all of the basic supporting infrastructure behind ordinary life, and the more of him that required, the fewer of him could be training, so shortcuts of all types had begun appearing. For example, wood stoves, which were all most peasants could afford, though nobles and ninja cooked on gas or electric ranges, produced a great deal of ash during the course of their ordinary operations. The Uchiha clan kitchens had all been gas or electric, however those services had been cut long ago, and restoring them, when the utility companies knew it was going to be the village pariah on the receiving end of those comforts, was both a diplomatic and bureaucratic nightmare, suffering delays so intense they often didn't get those services restored at all before a reset. Wood stoves were an option, but once Naruto got tired of hauling ash, his answer was to place seals across the ovens, ranges and refrigerators of those kitchens. Apply chakra and they heated or cooled as needed. The real breakthrough came in the fact that a trivial amount of chakra, say enough to run a C-ranked fire jutsu, would run those appliances for days on end, as desired. It really wasn't any more heat than a basic fire technique, just spread out over a much longer time and given on forward/off controls. Similarly with the hot water pipes. A few seals and a small amount of chakra and you could soak under a shower until you were a prune and the water would never stop being as cool or warm as you liked it. And, it was so comfortable, his wives insisted he expand on that and they installed their own hot spring resort, with seal-powered hot water pipes, a completely unnecessary luxury, as he'd long ago perfected various water techniques for cleaning oneself completely and comfortably wherever one might be. Actually, in an effort to be nice, he'd invented an entire library of small ninja grooming techniques, including everything from doing hair to nails to pedicure and cleaning teeth, all of the way up to stuff no one likes to talk about. A girl could look sparkling and gorgeous within moments of waking up. And yet, somehow, they all preferred the personal touch. So Day Spa Naruto had an unceasing supply of business as he pampered and massaged his angels. Of course, though they didn't speak of it, they all had learned those grooming techniques. And it didn't seem to matter how nasty conditions were, they all looked gorgeous all of the time. Central heating and air conditioning were being added, also using seals. The girls wanted marble and alabaster wherever they could get them, and it was getting to the point where it might just be easier to build his own compound rather than convert the Uchiha one to Kitsune standards. Of course, it still came with a huge chunk of land, and he got it free, so even if he'd never found that drat library in spite of churning it all down to bedrock, they'd keep getting this old place and fixing it up. He'd just started to get tired of how much work it needed. Kin looked at her teammates, Doju and Zaku, and had an odd moment. For a good dozen or so resets now she'd been poisoning their tea with paralytic agents so herself and other members of the Kitsune clan could practice the impure resurrection technique using them. It's not like they would be missed, but she had a moment of doubt, wondering when their lives had stopped being important to her. Then it came to her, the sound team had been formed out of convenience, not friendship. They'd never meant much of anything to each other as people. Well, that made this easy to do then. She whistled merrily as she poured the paralytic powders into their breakfast tea. Early reset morning, while Naruto was busy creating all of their gear and upgrading the old house, Hinata diverted from her usual projects, sending off clones to see to them, while she herself went another way. There was a secret, hidden lab in or close to Konoha where Orochimaru made his experiments trying to give the first Hokage's bloodline ability to use wood techniques to test subjects. That lab had been sealed but not destroyed when he was driven out, and Hinata had learned of it one night when Anko had been bearing her soul about why her old teacher was such scum, how it had hurt her to be so betrayed, and what he'd done to deserve getting thrown out. Killing lots of Konoha citizens had indeed been very bad. And while the good girl had no intention of following in his footsteps, during the long project to get her bloodline copied out to the rest of the clan, she had acquired an ambition. Tsunade was the granddaughter of the first Hokage, but despite that she did not have his vaunted bloodline, which seemed unfair to the formerly shy girl. Those wood techniques, it had been said, had been used to build Konoha in a day, and in her opinion the village was a sadder, poorer place without them. More importantly, at least in the immediate sense, by learning to reactivate a dormant bloodline, Hinata could perform a treatment that had not been done before, and so earn her status as a medical ninja in Tsunade's eyes. It was a powerful and lofty ambition, for the humble, unwanted girl out of a hostile and disapproving family to be achieving the official recognition of one of the legendary Sannin, in her peculiar area of specialty. Of course, the young Hyuga heiress had already achieved all of her other life goals. She was now loved and cherished by the boy she'd loved from afar off, whose many qualities she had admired since as long as she could remember. She'd also achieved her side goals of having good friends and being a strong ninja. Under Naruto's tutelage she was even becoming an excellent cook and housekeeper because, according to their previous den mother Kuinai, no woman can ever be complete in life if she is a failure at her gender. So all of Naruto's angels had arranged to be doing all of the babysitting and child care missions they could, in order to prepare for their futures. And, in the monumentally unlikely event that anything ever happened to Naruto, they all had to be able to take care of themselves and their future households. There were very many unhappy just-in-case precautions that had to be taken as a family of ninjas. But, should the worst ever happen, it would be slightly better for all of them if they'd taken steps ahead of time. That was just common shinobi sense, which didn't mean that all ninja actually did it. But, these resets would end eventually, and after that should any of them die they'd most probably stay dead, which was why they were studying medicine as well as improving their combat skills, to put any such possibility as far off as possible. So, not only did this pursuit grant her a new goal in life, but Hinata also had to shyly admit in the heart of her soul that granting new powers to Naruto and the rest made it that much more unlikely they'd ever lose him. Because, realistically, if she could ever awaken Tsunad's dormant bloodline abilities to use wood techniques, it wouldn't be a moment before someone was working on how to share those out among the clan. The doors to that great underground lab were under seals very similar to the alarm and warding seals around the Uchiha estate. But, the girls having been bypassing those for simply years to get an early start on things while the Hokage granted those lands to Naruto, it was no great effort to slip by these as well. The interior of the lab was dark, as well as trapped. Most of those traps had been overcome by Sarutobi when the third Hokage had found his favorite student Orochimaru doing immoral and disgusting research in here. However, being ninja, they'd reset most of those before they'd left to seal it up, as it made the whole thing that much more secure to add the original security measures, suitably modified to surprise their master should he ever try to return, on top of the new, additional security and traps they added. Most of those had never accounted for an intruder as well outfitted to be a thief as an average member of the Kitsune clan. With a nose to warn her of acid jets, pits concealed under trapdoors that were full of boiling tar, able to smell the poison on hidden needles and tell her if there were any snakes, bugs or rodents present, Hinata did fairly well. The poor girl easily sidestepped a pendulum and rotating knives her whiskers warned her about, before deciding she was tired of not finding the hidden tripwires ahead of time and activated her white eyes. Things got a lot easier when you could see the trap mechanisms, as well as the energy of lurking seals, waiting to activate. In record time the small girl was inside of the lab proper and reading copious project notes Orochimaru had left behind. He'd started with basic bloodline theft and transfer techniques, of which she was by now fully familiar, but began to research the extra step and move on to where he could take bloodlines from long-dead body tissue, rather than requiring a living sample. And he'd kept carefully meticulous notes on what he did and how well it worked, or didn't, hoping to be able to reproduce results on himself should he have any successes. The Hokage's party had apparently left the lab and sealed it in disgust without ever pausing to find those papers, while she presumed Orochimaru had assumed they had been found or destroyed. So it was that Hinata was the first one in a lifetime to find those notes and read them, discovering the work of a mad ninja who was also a genius. That's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching and remember to like, share and subscribe the channel if you like the video. Also tell me your recommendations in the comment section down below. See you next time.